Hi, everyone. And in this video, we're going to talk about how cybersecurity differs between traditional IT environments and we talk about industrial control systems or operational technology environments, or when we start thinking of different critical infrastructure sites like power plants and petrochemical facilities or even dams and water treatment facilities. And so when I start thinking about the differences, I always start with thinking about, when we work in those different environments from that perspective. They're very, very different. In a traditional IT environment, it's all of our employees that work in an office environment. We're sitting at our cubicles or in an office, or we're working from home where we're nice and safe and we can focus on that Word document or that Excel spreadsheet or the online shopping that we're doing at the time. In ICS or OT environments, it's very different when you think about if I have, let's say, a power plant. And maybe I'm sitting, sure, in the operations center for that facility, and that might feel safe, but there's always a chance of something going wrong at that facility, right? There's much higher risk of danger. Right? And and what if I have to actually go out into the plant to do work like maintenance, or if I'm doing some type of walkthrough, right? There's definitely a high level of concern with physical safety, right? With somebody getting hurt, or how hurt are they going to become, or could they potentially, lose their lives at that facility? So there's a big difference between sitting in an office or working from home where we're nice and safe versus being in a industrial control environment, especially if you're out in that facility, out in the plant where it's not safe, right, for you to be. Not 100%. Right? We can be as safe as possible in those environments to reduce the risk of physical harm or loss of life, but nothing is 100%. So when we get into the differences from a cybersecurity perspective, I like to look at three main things, right? In IT, and we'll come back and talk about this, in information technology or just in a general business environment, we're always talking about ensuring that attackers or evil hackers don't have access to our systems and data. And we want to protect, most of all, access. We're talking about protection from unauthorized access to our most sensitive data. Whereas in industrial control environments, that's where we look at the the main goal is always physical safety, making sure that the on-site personnel go home at the end of their shift and nothing, no harm comes to them. That's the main goal. Period. The end. Now we also talk about there's environmental safety. So there's a concern of what would happen if you had a power plant or, let's say, a petrochemical facility and there was an explosion at that petrochemical facility. How would it impact the environment around it? So there's serious consequences, potential consequences, when we have issues with certain types of facilities, like an explosion at a petrochemical facility that could have a substantial, significant impact on the surrounding environment. So we're always worried about, or we're always concerned with ensuring physical safety. We also think of safety of the environment around the facility. And then we talk about availability, making sure that that facility or that plant stays up and running. So if I do have a power plant, I want to make sure that it's up and running 24/7, 365, generating power. That's what it was designed to do. And of course, that's what the business gets paid for. But it's not just a question of how much money we're making, because it's also about providing those critical services to the people in the world around us. I always like to talk about and think of it from the perspective of, sure, we can live without power for a couple of hours, or yeah, maybe 6, 7, 8 hours. But what happens when that gets extended to a day or days potentially become weeks, or weeks become months? You can start to think of the different consequences as over time if we lose a specific type of site or plant, like when we started mentioning power plants, chemical or petrochemical facilities or refineries, water treatment facilities, right? Transportation, like rail. When we lose these different types of critical infrastructure, what is the impact to the world around us? Again, the longer they're down, the exponentially the risk associated and the consequences associated with no longer having those services just multiply exponentially. It's much different in the IT world when we go back to thinking, oh, if my laptop goes down, oh, it's okay, I'll get a new one. Or if a server goes down, that's okay, I'll get a new one. Or what if the entire company becomes infected with ransomware and the company goes down for a couple of days? Is that very significant to the company? Most definitely. I'm not trying to make light of it, but it's much different if we lost a power plant and couldn't bring it up for days, if not weeks or months. So those are the main differences when we talk about, where is the focus from a cybersecurity perspective when we think of traditional, or I should say, just informational technology or typical back office environments versus in industrial control and operational technology. There's also a conversation of people always love to have this, so I went ahead and put it in here, talking about when we look at it from, if you want, the paperwork perspective, or this idea that in IT, right, we always talk about CIA, right, the holy trinity of IT cybersecurity. Right, the one thing we're always focused on more than anything is ensuring confidentiality of data. Right, that only the authorized personnel can access our data, the information of the companies, right? And that majority of what we do in cybersecurity is about protecting that access and preventing unauthorized access to that sensitive or that critical data. We also talk about ensuring integrity. So integrity is this idea that the data we have is what we think it is, meaning somebody hasn't been able to come in and change data in some type of unauthorized format or fashion. And then availability. Right? Availability, which is interesting because most cybersecurity people do not think of availability as their job. Right? It's one of those probably dirty little secrets, even though if we sit and think about it, it's still right our primary responsibility. Think of the ransomware example we mentioned earlier. Right? If I have a ransomware infection and it takes down the entire company, I've failed in my job. Whereas again, on the OT side of the house, where availability is always our primary concern after, remember, we talk about physical safety and environmental safety. But looking at it just from that CIA perspective, here you can see in OT, yeah, we want to make sure the facility is up and running because we're providing critical services to the world around us. And then we worry about integrity. I want to make sure somebody can't come in and change how my different processes in that plant or that facility run. What if I had say, a chemical facility and it has a process to create, a certain chemical that we're going to ship and put in stores? I want to make sure that somebody isn't able to come in and slightly tweak that formula and the process in which it's put together and made to then go ahead and you know, potentially destroy not only a batch, but drive everybody crazy and trying to figure out what happened, let alone it could potentially put people's lives in danger. Lives in danger. And then you can see very last, we talk about confidentiality. So yeah, we don't want people coming in and stealing our information. We don't want them stealing that process data, right? If I'm we always talk about the classic example of if I'm Coca-Cola, right? We don't want the attackers coming in and stealing the information. But if I have a plant where I'm actually creating Coke and putting it in bottles, I want to make sure nothing happens to that actual process. Or not only could the product be degraded, but what if somebody could make it harmful to drink? Just in a wild, crazy scenario, right? So we need to make sure we have checks and balances to make sure the integrity of our systems and our data, especially that process, those processes, those industrial processes in the OT world. And then availability, right? If I'm Coca-Cola, the main thing is making sure that that plant stays up and running, creating Coke, right? Creating those products that we can ship out and sell to generate revenue. So hopefully that gives you an idea, though, the differences, the main differences between the cybersecurity focus in IT environments versus industrial control or operational technology environments. I just want to say thanks for taking the time to look at the video. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out. And you can find me at my email there or on LinkedIn. Thanks again.